After 45 years, she lost her home in one morning, but what her husband hid changed everything. The house was still dark when Marjorie woke, the air carrying the quiet after a coastal storm. She moved through the kitchen like she always had. Same cup, same window, same view. But something felt wrong. Not broken. Just missing. By mid-morning, two strangers stood at her door with papers she didn't understand. And within minutes, the life she'd lived for decades was no longer hers. If you were in her place, would you have trusted those papers or questioned everything? The rain had passed sometime in the night. Marjorie Hale could tell before she even opened her eyes. There was a certain stillness that came after a coastal storm. Not quiet, exactly. The ocean never allowed that, but a kind of settling. The wind had dropped. The shutters no longer rattled. Even the gulls seemed to wait a little longer before starting their morning calls. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling she had known for most of her life. The faint crack in the corner above the window. The place Leonard had promised to repaint 10 years ago, and never did. She had stopped reminding him. It became part of the room, like everything else. She pushed the covers back slowly and sat up. Her knees protested first, then her back, the usual order. At 72, she moved carefully in the mornings, not out of fear, just habit. She slipped her feet into her slippers, the soft lining worn thin at the heel, and stood. The house felt different. She couldn't have said how, not yet. Just something she noticed in the way you notice a missing picture on a wall you pass every day. She walked down the narrow hallway toward the kitchen. The floorboards creaked in the same places they always had. Third step near the doorway. A softer dip by the refrigerator. She didn't need the light. She knew the house in the dark as well as she knew it in daylight. The kitchen smelled faintly of cedar from the cabinets Leonard had installed back in the 80s. There was always a trace of it, especially in the early morning when the air was cool and still. Underneath it, the familiar scent of old coffee grounds from yesterday's pot. She reached for the kettle without thinking. Filled it. Set it on the stove. Turned the burner. Everything in the same order it had always been. But the silence stayed with her. It pressed in from the corners of the room, quiet but noticeable. Usually there was something else layered into it. Leonard clearing his throat in the living room. The low hum of the television he left on even when he wasn't watching. The soft shuffle of his slippers on the hallway floor. Now there was only the kettle beginning to warm. She rested her hands on the edge of the counter and looked out the window. The yard was damp from the night rain. The grass darker, the old fence leaning the same way it had leaned for years. Beyond it, just a sliver of gray-blue where the ocean sat under the morning sky. You couldn't see much of it from the kitchen, but you could always hear it, a steady presence, like breathing. She had lived in this house for 45 years. She knew how the light came in through that window in October, knew which cabinet door stuck when the humidity rose, knew the sound the back screen door made when it didn't latch properly. She knew everything about it, or she thought she did. The kettle began to whisper. She poured the water into her cup, watched the steam rise, held it in both hands for a moment before taking a sip. It had gone slightly bitter. She must have used the last of the grounds without noticing. She didn't fix another cup. Instead, she stood there looking at nothing in particular, trying to name the feeling that had settled in her chest. It wasn't grief, not exactly. That had been there for months now, since Leonard passed. A quieter thing than she expected. It came in waves, usually at night. This was something else. A pause, like the house itself was waiting. By 8:30, she had washed the cup, wiped the counter, and folded the dish towel the way she always did, edges lined up, no wrinkles. She moved through the motions of the morning without thinking about them. At 9, she sat down at the kitchen table. The chair across from her remained empty. She looked at it for longer than she meant to. At 9:15, she heard a car pull into the gravel drive. That wasn't unusual, not entirely. Deliveries came sometimes. Neighbors stopped by. But this car didn't turn off right away. The engine idled. Then the doors opened. 2 of them. Marjorie stood. She walked to the front window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. 2 men stepped out of a dark sedan. Not from around here. You could tell by the way they looked at the house first, like they were checking it against something in their minds. They wore jackets despite the mild morning. One carried a leather folder under his arm. She let the curtain fall. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she went to the door. She opened it before they knocked. "Mrs. Hale?" the taller one asked, his voice careful, practiced. "Yes." He gave a small nod, as if confirming something already known. "My name is Daniel Reeves. This is Mr. Carter. We're here regarding the property." Property. The word didn't sit right. She stepped back slightly, allowing them space to speak, but not inviting them in. "I'm sorry," she said. "What property?" They exchanged a brief glance. Not confusion, more like timing. "The residence at this address," the second man said, holding up the folder. "There are documents we need to review with you." Marjorie looked at the folder, then back at their faces. "I think you've made a mistake," she said. Not sharply, just a statement. "No, ma'am," Reeves said gently. "We haven't." He opened the folder and took out a set of papers, neatly organized, tabs along the side. He held them out. Marjorie hesitated, then took them. The paper felt heavier than it should have. She scanned the first page. The words didn't arrange themselves into meaning right away. Legal language, formal, detached. Her name appeared near the bottom. Her signature. She knew her signature. She had written it thousands of times over the years. Checks, forms, cards. But seeing it there on that page, under that heading, she looked up. "I don't understand." Reeves nodded, as if expecting that. "These documents reflect a transfer of ownership," he said. "The property is no longer in your name." The sentence landed without sound. For a second, it didn't connect to anything real. "No," she said, almost automatically. "That's not possible." Carter stepped forward slightly, pointing to a section on the page. "This was executed several months ago," he said. "All signatures are verified." Marjorie looked down again. Her name, her handwriting, the date. Something in her chest tightened. "I never," she started, then stopped. Because she had. Somewhere in the past months, sitting at this very table maybe, Leonard across from her, papers spread out, asking her to sign here and here and here. She hadn't read them. She trusted him. The men waited. Not impatient, just still. "How long do I have?" she asked. The question surprised even her. Reeves took a breath. "The transition is effective immediately," he said carefully. "We can allow you a short period to gather your belongings. A few hours today." A few hours. Marjorie lowered the papers slowly. She looked past them, over their shoulders, at the yard, the fence, the sliver of ocean beyond it, the house behind her. 45 years. Condensed into a sentence. She nodded once. "All right," she said. Her voice didn't shake. But something inside her shifted, quietly and completely, like a door closing in another room. And the house, for the first time since she had woken up that morning, felt exactly as silent as it should have been. Marjorie stood in the doorway for a moment longer, the papers still in her hands. The men waited. They didn't rush her. They didn't speak again. Just stood there on the porch as if they had done this before, as if they understood that time moved differently in moments like this. She turned back into the house without inviting them in. "Give me a little time," she said over her shoulder. Reeves nodded. "Of course." She walked slowly to the kitchen table. The chair scraped lightly against the floor as she pulled it out. That same soft, uneven sound it had made for years. She sat down, the papers spread in front of her, her hand resting on either side as though she were steadying something that might slip away. For a while she didn't read. She just looked. Her name appeared more than once, printed clearly, signed at the bottom in blue ink, dates arranged in a way that suggested a sequence she hadn't followed at the time. She picked up the first page again. This time she read more carefully. Words began to take shape. Transfer of ownership, secured obligation, authorization. They were cold words, precise, not written for understanding, written to be correct. She turned the page, then another. Her fingers moved more slowly now, tracing lines, pausing at paragraphs she didn't fully grasp, but felt the weight of anyway. The kettle on the stove clicked as it cooled. The house remained still. She reached the last page and saw it again. Her signature. Not rushed, not forced, just written. A memory surfaced, faint at first. The kitchen table. Papers stacked neatly in front of her. Leonard sitting across from her, glasses low on his nose, reading through something before sliding it toward her. "Just sign here, Marge," he had said, tapping the bottom corner with his finger. "It's for the insurance adjustment." She had nodded. She hadn't asked questions. He handled those things, always had. She had signed where he pointed. She closed her eyes for a moment. There had been other days like that. Different stacks of paper, different explanations, medical forms, billing statements, adjustments, words that blurred together after a while. He had been sick. That was what she remembered most clearly. The way his voice had changed toward the end, softer, slower. The way he sat more often than he stood. The way she had watched him, not the papers. She opened her eyes and looked back down. "How many?" she said quietly, not realizing she had spoken out loud. There was no answer. She gathered the pages together and aligned them carefully, tapping the edges against the table until they were even. Then she noticed something. A date. April. She frowned slightly. Leonard had still been better then. Not well, but not as far along as he was later in the year. She flipped back. Another date. June, then August. The signatures spanned months, not one moment, a process. She leaned back in her chair. The wood creaked under her weight. Her eyes moved slowly across the kitchen, the cabinets, the sink, the window, everything exactly where it had always been. Except now it wasn't hers. The thought came cleanly this time, without resistance, not confusion, not denial, just a fact settling into place. She stood up. The movement felt automatic, like something her body knew to do before her mind caught up. She walked down the hallway to the bedroom. The bed was still made from the morning. the quilt folded neatly at the foot. Leonard sighed untouched. The indentation long gone, but the space still there. She opened the closet. Clothes hung in quiet rows. Some she hadn't worn in years. Others she still reached for without thinking. She pulled out a small suitcase from the top shelf, set it on the bed. For a moment, she just stood there, looking at it. Then she opened it. Back in the kitchen, the front door remained slightly ajar. The men spoke in low voices on the porch, their words carried away by the faint breeze. Marjorie moved through the house slowly. Not searching. Selecting. A few changes of clothes, her coat, the worn pair of shoes she trusted for longer walks. She folded everything with care, smoothing each piece before placing it inside. She went to the living room next. The photograph on the mantel caught her eye. Her and Leonard standing side by side, both looking slightly uncomfortable in formal clothes. Their 30th anniversary. Someone else had taken the picture. She remembered that much. She picked it up, held it for a moment, then carried it back to the bedroom and wrapped it in a sweater before placing it in the suitcase. She paused at the doorway. Her gaze moved across the room one last time. There were other things she could take. There were many things she could take, but she didn't. She closed the suitcase. When she returned to the kitchen, she placed the papers back on the table. This time, she stacked them neatly and set them aside. She picked up a pen from the drawer and pulled a blank piece of paper toward her. She wrote down the dates, June, August. She stared at them for a long time, trying to place them, trying to remember what those days had felt like, the shape of them. But memory didn't return the way she wanted it to. It came in fragments. A doctor's office. A pharmacy line. Leonard's hand resting on the table, thinner than it used to be. Just sign here, Marge. Her hand tightened slightly around the pen. She set it down. Outside, one of the men knocked lightly on the doorframe. Mrs. Hale? Reeves called gently. We just wanted to check in, see how you're doing. She looked toward the doorway. For a second, she didn't answer. Then she stood. I'm all right, she said. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't false either. She walked to the door and opened it wider. I'll be ready soon, she added. Reeves gave a small nod. Take your time, he said. She almost smiled at that. Time. The one thing that had already been decided without her. She closed the door again and leaned against it for a moment. The wood was cool against her back. Her eyes moved once more through the house, not searching for anything now, just seeing it fully. For the first time that morning, she felt something clear. Not confusion, not even anger. Something quieter, more precise. He had known she would sign. Leonard. He had known she wouldn't read every page. He had known she trusted him enough not to. The realization didn't come all at once. It settled in slowly, like everything else that morning. She straightened, picked up her suitcase, and without looking back again, she walked toward the door. The house remained exactly as it had been. Only now, it belonged to someone else. Marjorie stood at the edge of the gravel drive with her suitcase beside her. The men had already gone back to their car. One of them spoke quietly into a phone, his voice low, professional. The other leaned against the door, waiting. She didn't look at them. She kept her eyes on the house. From the outside, nothing had changed. The same faded blue paint, the same sag in the porch railing Leonard had meant to fix, the same wind chimes hanging near the door, still and silent in the damp morning air. She had walked out of that door a few minutes ago. Just walked out. No ceremony, no final glance from the doorway, no moment where she told herself this was the last time. Now she stood at a distance, and it felt different, as if the house had already stepped back from her. Mrs. Hale. She turned. Reeves stood a few feet away, his expression measured, careful. "We can arrange transportation if you need it," he said, "or give you time to call someone." Someone. Marjorie thought about that. There were people she could call, neighbors, her daughter Ellen, 2 towns over, a few old friends she still spoke to from time to time. But the thought of explaining this, right now, standing here with her suitcase in the damp gravel, felt like something she wasn't ready to do. "I'll manage," she said. Reeves nodded. He didn't press. She reached down, lifted the suitcase and began walking toward the road. The gravel shifted under her shoes. The morning air carried the faint smell of salt and wet wood. Behind her, a car door closed. The engine started. She didn't turn around. By noon, she was sitting in the front seat of a delivery truck headed inland. The driver had offered her a ride without much conversation. He was a local man, middle-aged, with a quiet way about him. He had loaded her suitcase into the back without asking questions. "Where to?" he had said. She had given him the name of a town about 20 miles in. It was the first place she could think of that wasn't here. Now the road stretched ahead of them, the ocean disappearing behind a line of low trees. The air changed as they drove, less salt, more dust. Marjorie rested her hands in her lap and watched the landscape shift. Houses spaced farther apart, yards without fences, then small clusters of buildings, gas stations, a diner, a row of shops with faded signs. The driver turned the radio on for a moment, then off again. "You from the coast?" he asked finally. "Yes." He nodded, as if that explained everything. They drove the rest of the way in silence. The room was above a hardware store on a narrow street that smelled faintly of oil and old lumber. The owner, a woman named Clara, had shown it to her without much fuss. "It's simple," Clara had said, unlocking the door, "but it's clean, week to week if that suits you." It did. Now Marjorie stood in the middle of the room, her suitcase at her feet. A bed against one wall, a small table near the window, a single chair. The floor creaked differently here, sharper, less familiar. Through the window she could see the street below. People moving, cars passing, no ocean. She set the suitcase on the bed and opened it. Clothes folded neatly, the wrapped photograph. Her coat. She unpacked slowly, placing each item with care, as if the arrangement might bring some order to the rest of it. When she finished, the room looked no different than before. Just occupied. She sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped slightly under her weight. From downstairs came the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor, a hammer striking wood. Voices, familiar to each other, not to her. She listened for a moment. Then she leaned back and closed her eyes. The quiet here was not the same as the quiet in her house. This one was filled with other people's lives. That night, she didn't sleep much. The sounds were different. A truck passing too close to the building, footsteps on the stairs, a door closing somewhere down the hall. She lay on her side, facing the wall, her hands folded under her chin. And her mind began to move. Not in a straight line. In fragments. Leonard at the table. The papers. Just sign here, Marge. The way he had tapped the page lightly, not looking at her. Another memory. A receipt on the counter she hadn't paid attention to. Gas from a town she didn't recognize. A weekend he said he needed to check on something. She had asked what. Just work, he had said. She had nodded. That was how it worked. He handled certain things. She handled others. It had never felt unbalanced. Until now. She opened her eyes. The room was dark except for a thin strip of light from the street lamp outside. She turned onto her back and stared at the ceiling. The paint was uneven. A small crack ran from the corner of the room toward the center, stopping short. She followed it with her eyes. Then, without meaning to, she began placing things along it. Dates. April, Chot. June, August. She saw them again, written on the paper she had left on the kitchen table. The thought came quietly. Those weren't just papers. They were something else. A process. Something that had been happening over time. She sat up. The movement was sudden enough to make the bed creak. Her suitcase sat open at the foot of the bed. Inside, beneath the folded clothes, was the stack of documents she had brought without really thinking. She reached for them, pulled them out, set them on the bed beside her. The paper felt the same, heavy, precise. She turned on the small lamp next to the bed. The light was dim, yellowed, but enough. She began again. Page by page, slower this time. Not just reading, looking. She paused at the dates, checked the signatures, compared them. Her own handwriting. Always steady, always the same. She frowned slightly. Then she reached for the notepad on the table. It was cheap, the kind sold in stacks near the register downstairs. She brought it back to the bed, wrote the dates down again. April, June, August. Then she added something else, a small note beside each one. What she remembered, or thought she remembered. April, doctor's appointment. June, pharmacy run. August, hospital visit. She stared at the list. It didn't feel complete, but it felt closer. She set the pen down. Her eyes moved back to the documents. There was something here, not clear yet, but not random. She could feel that much. Downstairs, the noise had stopped. The building had settled into its own kind of quiet. Marjorie leaned back against the headboard, the papers spread around her. For the first time since she had left the house, the confusion began to take shape. Not less, but more defined. And somewhere inside that shape, something waited. She didn't know what yet, but she knew she would keep looking. Because now there was nothing else left to trust but what she could see for herself. Marjorie stayed awake long after the building had gone quiet. The lamp cast a small circle of light over the bed. Papers spread out, the notepad beside them. Her handwriting, careful but slightly uneven now, filled the top half of the page. April, June, August. She looked at them again. Then she picked up another document and flipped to the second page. There. A charge. Not large enough to notice at the time. Not something that would have stood out on a bank statement if you weren't looking for it. Fuel. Location code she didn't recognize. She circled it. Her pen made a soft scratching sound against the paper. She reached for another sheet, then another. Slowly, Something began to repeat. Fuel charges. Every few weeks. Always on a Friday or Saturday. Always tied to towns she had never been to with him. She leaned back slightly. Leonard had not been a man who drove without reason. He didn't take trips just to pass time. Every drive had a purpose, a job, an errand, something that needed to be done. She tapped the pen lightly against the page. Then she wrote another column. Locations. She copied them down carefully, one by one, as they appeared across different statements. More than she expected. She paused, looked at the list. The names meant nothing to her on their own, but the repetition did. She reached for her phone on the table. It took her a moment to remember how to pull up the map. She didn't use it often, never needed to, not in a place where she had lived her entire life. Now, she typed in the first town. Waited. The map loaded slowly. A small dot appeared inland. Not far from the coast, but not where they lived. She entered the second. Another dot. Then the third. She watched as they lined up. Not scattered, not random. A loose path, heading south along the coastline. Her brow tightened. She set the phone down, looked back at the papers, then at her notes. Her fingers rested on the edge of the notepad. There was something else. She could feel it. Not just where he had gone. Why? She turned to a different set of documents. Bank summaries this time, the kind that listed totals, not details. She flipped through them quickly at first, then slower. Then she stopped. There, a recurring entry. Small, consistent, once a year, same month, same amount. No description beyond a short code. She circled it, then flipped back. Found it again in the previous year. Circled that one too. Then the year before. Her breath slowed. How long? She murmured quietly. She kept going. Year after year, the same entry, the same amount. Paid every September. She counted. More than a decade. She sat very still. The building creaked softly around her. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed, its tires humming briefly before fading. She wrote it down. September. Recurring payment. Then she drew a line across the page, connecting it to the list of towns. She didn't know what the connection was yet, but she knew there was one. Leonard had not done anything casually, not for this long, not this consistently. She closed her eyes for a moment, tried to picture him, not at the kitchen table, not in the hospital, but somewhere else driving, stopping for gas in places she had never seen, making payments she had never noticed, doing something over and over again without ever telling her. Her eyes opened. She reached for another folder. This one older, worn at the edges. Inside were loose papers she hadn't looked at in years. Receipts, invoices, things they had kept without really organizing. She spread them out across the bed. The motion was slower now, more deliberate. She wasn't just searching, she was building. A timeline, a pattern. She checked dates against dates, receipts against statements. Sometimes they matched, sometimes they didn't. The ones that didn't, she set aside. A separate pile, smaller at first, then growing. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, staring at the two stacks, one that fit, one that didn't. The second one told a different story. She picked up a receipt from the top of that pile. faded ink. A small coastal town printed at the top, not far from one of the locations she had written down. She turned it over. Nothing on the back, no note, no explanation, just a place she had never been. Her fingers tightened slightly around the paper. Leonard had kept this. For no reason she could see. Unless... She stopped the thought before it formed completely. Not yet. She set the receipt down carefully. Then she reached for the next one. Same pattern, different town, different date, same kind of silence around it. She sat back again. The bed creaked under her. The room felt smaller now, not because of the space, because of what was filling it. Questions. Not loud ones, not panicked. Quiet, precise, the kind that didn't go away. She looked at the clock. Past midnight, closer to 1. She hadn't noticed the time passing. She gathered the papers slowly, stacked them into groups, aligned the edges, set the notepad on top. Then she picked up the pen again. At the bottom of the page, she wrote one more line. Same places, same payments, same time each year. She underlined it once. Then she set the pen down. Her hands rested on the paper. Still, the feeling in her chest had changed. It wasn't just confusion anymore. It had shape now. Direction. She didn't know what it meant yet. But she knew this: Leonard had been going somewhere, regularly, for years. And whatever it was, it had been important enough to hide. Marjorie turned off the lamp. The room fell into darkness. She lay back slowly, her head settling into the pillow. Her eyes stayed open. In the quiet, she could almost hear it, the low hum of a car engine, a road stretching ahead, and Leonard somewhere along it. Not lost, not wandering, going somewhere he meant to go. And now, for the first time, she intended to follow. Morning came slowly. A pale light slipped through the thin curtains, turning the room a washed-out gray. Marjorie opened her eyes without moving. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then the ceiling came into focus. The crack. The unfamiliar walls, the quiet hum of life below her that wasn't hers. She sat up. The papers were still spread across the bed where she had left them. The notepad, the pen, the lines she had drawn between places and dates and numbers that had started to mean something. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she reached over and gathered them carefully, stacking each sheet, aligning the edges the way she always had. Order mattered, even now. Especially now. She placed the stack on the small table by the window. Then she opened her suitcase. Her clothes sat neatly folded, untouched since the day before. On top of them, wrapped in a soft sweater, was the photograph. She hesitated before reaching for it. Her hand hovered for a second. Then she lifted it out. The frame was simple, dark wood, slightly worn along the edges from years of being moved, dusted, handled without thinking. She sat down on the bed and held it in her lap. Her and Leonard, 30 years married. She remembered the day clearly enough. Not every detail, but the feeling of it. The way he had stood beside her, a little stiff in his jacket, looking at the camera like he was waiting for it to be over. She had always liked that about him. He didn't pretend to enjoy things he didn't. He simply stood through them. She ran her thumb lightly along the edge of the frame. Something caught. A slight unevenness along the back. She frowned, just slightly. That hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had. Maybe she had never noticed. She turned the frame over. The backing was held in place by small metal tabs, the kind you bend back when you want to change a picture. She had never changed this one, never needed to. Her finger moved along the edge again. There it was. A faint line. Not part of the frame itself, something else. She leaned forward, bringing it closer to the light. The line ran straight across, just below the center. Too straight, too clean to be damage. She pressed lightly. Nothing. Then a little harder, still nothing. She set the frame down on the bed, reached into her suitcase and pulled out a small nail file from her toiletries bag. Carefully, she slid the tip under one of the metal tabs and lifted it. Then another, and another. The backing loosened with a soft, dry sound. She removed it slowly. The photograph slid forward slightly. She caught it with her fingers and set it aside. Now she could see the inside of the frame. And that's when she noticed it. The backing wasn't just a single piece. There was a second panel, thinner, fitted so precisely it had been invisible until now. Her breath slowed. She touched it. The edge was smooth, intentional. Not something that had shifted over time, something that had been placed there, deliberately. Her fingers trembled slightly as she worked the edge of the nail file beneath it. For a moment, it resisted. Then it gave. A soft release. The panel lifted, and behind it, something folded. Paper. And something else. Small. Metal. She stopped. Just for a second. Not from fear. From the sudden awareness that whatever this was, it had been waiting. She reached in and carefully pulled the contents free. A folded document. And a key. The key was small. Brass, worn at the edges. Attached to it by a thin loop of string was a piece of sea glass, smooth and pale, the kind you find along the shoreline after years of being turned in the water. Marjorie stared at it. Her fingers closed around the key. It felt solid. Real. Not imagined. She set it gently on the bed beside her. Then she unfolded the document. The paper was thicker than the others she had been reading. Older, too. The edges slightly yellowed, the creases sharp from being folded and left that way for a long time. Her eyes moved across the top line. Deed of ownership. She froze. Then she read it again. Slower. The words arranged themselves more clearly this time. A property. Location listed. Not their address. Not anywhere she recognized. She kept reading. The legal description of the land, the boundaries, the date. Her eyes stopped there. The date. Decades ago. Long before Leonard had gotten sick. Long before any of the papers she had signed at the kitchen table. She turned the page. His name. Leonard Hale. Owner. Not shared. Not transferred. His. Her grip tightened slightly on the paper. She went back to the first page. Read it again. Carefully. The address stood out now. A coastal road. Further south. One of the names she had written down the night before. Her breath caught, just slightly. She reached for the notepad on the table, flipped it open, found the list. There it was. The same town, the same stretch of coastline. She looked back at the deed, then at the key, then at the piece of sea glass. A memory surfaced. Faint. Leonard coming home one afternoon years ago, setting something small on the counter. A piece of glass, worn smooth. He had picked it up somewhere, he said. She hadn't asked where. She hadn't asked a lot of things. Her chest tightened. Not sharply, just enough to notice. She lowered the paper slowly into her lap. The room felt different now. Not smaller. Not quieter. Full. Of something she hadn't expected to find. She looked around, as if the answer might be written somewhere else. But there was only the bed, the table, the window, and this. The key. The deed. Hidden in a frame she had seen every day for years. She picked up the key again, turned it in her fingers. The light caught on the worn edges. Used. Not decorative, not symbolic, functional. Made to open something. She set it back down carefully. Then she folded the deed along its original lines. Her movements were slow now. Measured. She placed the paper on the table beside her notes. Looked at both. Side by side. The pattern she had started to see. And this. The answer to part of it. But not all. Not yet. Her eyes moved once more to the address. She said it quietly, under her breath, testing the sound of it. It felt unfamiliar, but not entirely, as if she had heard it once long ago and forgotten. She stood. The floor creaked under her weight. She walked to the window, looked out at the street below. People moved as they always did. Cars passed. Life continued. Unaware. Unchanged. Behind her, on the bed, the key and the deed waited. Marjorie rested her hand lightly against the glass. Leonard had been going somewhere. Not just driving, not just passing time. Going here, to this place, for years. And he had never told her. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. The confusion was still there. The questions. But something else had taken its place beside them. Direction. She turned back into the room, picked up the key, folded the deed, and set both together on the table. This wasn't something she could leave alone. Not anymore. Because now she knew he hadn't just taken something from her. He had left something behind. And whatever it was, she was going to find it. Marjorie didn't rush. That surprised her. Standing there in the small room above the hardware store, with the deed and the key laid out in front of her, she expected something sharper. Urgency, panic, a need to act before the feeling faded. But it didn't come. Instead, she pulled the chair closer to the table and sat down. Slowly. The same way she had always approached things that mattered. She reached for the notepad first, flipped back to the page she had filled the night before. The list of towns, the dates, the payments. She studied them again. Now, with the deed beside them. The connection was no longer something she had to imagine. It was there, clearer, but still incomplete. She wrote the address from the deed at the top of a new page. Carefully. Each letter shaped the way she had been taught, the way she had written for decades. Then she underlined it once. Below it she wrote, "When." Then she went back to the deed. Her eyes moved to the date again. The year. Her breath slowed. That was before so many things. Before the last stretch of years that had blurred into hospital visits and medications and quiet evenings at home. This went back further, much further. She opened the folder again, pulled out older bank statements, the ones she had almost ignored before. Now she turned them over one by one, looking for the same pattern, the same amount, the same time of year. It took a while. The light in the room shifted as morning moved toward afternoon. The sounds from downstairs rose and fell. At one point, someone laughed loudly. Then it faded. Marjorie barely noticed. Her attention stayed on the paper. And then, there it was. The same entry. Years earlier. She circled it, then kept going. Another year. Another. The pattern held. She leaned back slightly, counted under her breath. 10 years. 12. 15. More. She stopped. Her fingers rested on the edge of the page. Leonard had been paying for something. Regularly. For decades. She picked up the deed again, looked at the address, then back at the list of towns, the path she had traced the night before. It all led here. Not by accident, not occasionally, but with intention, over and over again. She wrote another word on the page. Why? Then she sat there, looking at it, not expecting an answer, but letting the question take its place. Mouse. Her eyes moved to the key, still lying on the table, the sea glass catching the light. She picked it up again, turned it slowly between her fingers. It wasn't new. The edges were worn smooth from use, not from being kept, from being carried. Returned to. Her chest tightened, just slightly. He had been going there, opening something, closing it again, and coming back. She set the key down, reached for the documents once more. This time she wasn't looking for patterns. She was looking for moments, places where something might have shown itself. A change in account balance, a larger withdrawal, anything that stood out. Most of it didn't. That was the thing. It had been done carefully, quietly, nothing dramatic, nothing that would have made her stop and ask questions. Until now. She found a receipt tucked between two statements. She didn't remember seeing it before. Maybe she had. Maybe she hadn't noticed. The paper was thin, faded. A small coastal supply store. The date matched one of the trips. She turned it over. On the back, in Leonard's handwriting, was a single word. Nails. She stared at it. Such a simple thing, such an ordinary thing. And yet, why write it down? Why keep it? Unless it belonged to something larger. She set it aside, then found another. Different store, different date. On the back, sealant. Her fingers pressed lightly against the paper. She didn't move for a moment. Then she looked up. Not at anything specific, just into the room. The pieces were shifting. Not into a full picture, but into something closer. Leonard hadn't just been going somewhere. He had been working. Building, fixing, maintaining something over time. Something that required supplies. Something that lasted. Her eyes moved back to the deed, then to the key, then to the word she had written. Why? It changed. Not completely, but enough. She drew a line through it. Not hard, just once. Then she wrote beneath it, What? The question felt better, more solid, less about him, more about what he had been doing. She gathered the receipts into a small stack, placed them next to the notepad. Then she flipped to a fresh page, started writing again. Dates, supplies, locations. She linked them where she could, left space where she couldn't. The process steadied her, the same way it always had. When something didn't make sense, you didn't force it. You laid it out, piece by piece, and let it show itself. By late afternoon, the table was covered. Papers spread in careful groups, notes filling 3 pages now, lines connecting one thing to another. Not perfect, but clear enough. She sat back, let her hands rest in her lap, looked at what she had done. This was not something recent, not something done in secret for a short time. This was part of his life, a part she had not known existed, a part that had run alongside everything else. All those years, all those ordinary days. Her throat tightened slightly. Not with anger, not yet. Something else, something quieter. He had been living a second pattern, right next to the first, and she had never seen it. Or maybe she had seen pieces and hadn't known what they meant. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. The room had grown dimmer, the light outside shifting toward evening. She reached for the deed one more time, folded it carefully, placed it on top of her notes, then picked up the key, held it in her palm. It fit there easily, as if it belonged. She looked at the address again, spoke it once under her breath. This time it didn't feel unfamiliar. It felt like a place she hadn't been yet, but would. She stood. The chair moved back with a soft scrape. Her body felt tired now, but steady, more than it had that morning. She gathered the papers into a single stack, aligned them, set them neatly on the table. Then she walked to the window. Outside, the street carried on, people passing, lights coming on in the buildings across the way. The world didn't stop for things like this. It never had. She rested her hand lightly against the glass again. Then she nodded, just once. Not to anyone, to herself. This wasn't the end of something. Not yet. It was the beginning of something she hadn't expected. And now, she knew enough to move forward. Not blindly, not guessing, but following something real, something he had left behind, something she had uncovered herself. And wherever it led, she would be the one to decide what came next. Marjorie left before sunrise. She didn't make an announcement, didn't call anyone, didn't leave a note. There wasn't anyone she needed to explain this to. The room above the hardware store looked the same as when she had arrived. Bed made, chair tucked in, suitcase closed. Only now, the papers were packed neatly inside, along with the photograph and the key. She paused at the door for a moment. Not because she was unsure, just because she had learned, over time, to pause before crossing into something new. Then she stepped out and closed it behind her. The bus station was small. A single bench under a metal awning, a faded schedule posted behind glass. The kind of place where people didn't linger unless they had to. She sat with her suitcase beside her and the key in her coat pocket. Her fingers found it without looking. She held it there, feeling its shape, grounding herself in something solid. The sky slowly lightened. Gray first, then a pale blue stretching across the horizon. A bus pulled in with a low hiss of brakes. The driver opened the door and nodded once. "Where you headed?" he asked. Marjorie gave him the name of the coastal town written on the deed. He glanced at her briefly. "That's a ways down," he said. "You sure?" "Yes." He nodded again. "That'll be 2 transfers," he said. "I'll get you as close as I can." She stepped up onto the bus. The ride was long enough for the landscape to change more than once. The first stretch carried her through inland roads she didn't know. Flat fields, scattered houses, trees bending slightly in the morning wind. She sat by the window. Watched without really seeing at first. Her mind moved elsewhere. Back through the years. Not searching anymore. Just letting things surface. Leonard standing in the doorway with his keys in hand. "I'll be back before dinner." The sound of the car pulling away. How often had that happened? Too many times to count. Too ordinary to question. The bus slowed, stopped. People got on, got off. Life moving in small, separate directions. She stayed in her seat. Hands folded in her lap. The key still in her pocket. By midday, the air began to change. She noticed it before she saw anything. A shift. A hint of salt carried faintly on the wind. The bus turned onto a narrower road. Trees gave way to stretches of open land. Then, gradually, the horizon opened. A thin line of water appeared in the distance. Her breath caught. Not sharply, just enough. The ocean. Not the same stretch she had lived near for most of her life, but close enough to feel familiar. Close enough to mean something. The bus let her off at a small stop along the side of the road. No station, just a sign. The driver pointed ahead. "Town's about a mile that way," he said. "Road follows the coast." "Thank you," Marjorie said. She stepped down onto the gravel. The bus pulled away, leaving a brief cloud of dust behind it. Then it was quiet again. She stood there for a moment, listening. The sound of the ocean was stronger here, not hidden behind houses or fences, open. Steady. She picked up her suitcase, started walking. The road curved gently along the shoreline. On one side, low grass bent in the wind. On the other, small houses stood back from the road, spaced apart, some weathered, some newly painted. She walked at a steady pace, not fast, not slow, each step deliberate. The address was folded in her coat pocket. She didn't take it out. Not yet. Instead, she let herself take in the place, the way the air felt, cooler than inland. The smell of salt and something else, wood maybe, aged by years near the water. A truck passed her going the opposite direction. The driver lifted a hand briefly. She nodded, kept walking. The road narrowed, turned to packed sand in places, less maintained, less traveled. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the paper, unfolded it carefully, read the address again, then looked up. The numbers along the road grew farther apart, less regular. She counted as she walked, matched what she saw to what was written. Until she stopped. The house sat slightly back from the road. Not large, not small. Weathered wood siding, faded by sun and wind. A narrow path leading up through tall grass. Windows facing the ocean, their glass dull but intact. It didn't look abandoned, but it didn't look lived in either. It looked kept, in its own way. Marjorie stood at the edge of the path, her suitcase beside her. The wind moved through the grass, brushing against her coat. She looked at the house, then at the key in her hand, then back at the house again. This was it. Not something imagined. Not something built from papers and patterns and guesses. Real solid. Waiting. Her heart beat a little faster now. Not with fear. With something closer to anticipation. She stepped forward. The path crunched softly under her feet. Each step bringing her closer. Details came into focus. The frame of the door. The hinges. The way the wood had been repaired in places, carefully, not replaced. Her eyes moved over it all, recognizing something. Not the house itself, but the way it had been handled, maintained. Someone had cared for this place. Over time, she reached the porch. The boards creaked slightly under her weight. The sound felt familiar. Too familiar. She stopped in front of the door. Her hand hovered over the handle. Then she looked down at the key, turned it once in her fingers. The brass caught the light, worn smooth. Used. She raised it, fitted into the lock. For a second, it didn't move. Then, a soft click. The mechanism turned easily, recently maintained. Her breath slowed. She wrapped her fingers around the handle, pushed the door open. It gave without resistance. The air inside met her first. Dry, clean, with a faint trace of wood and something else she couldn't name. Not dust, not neglect. Something preserved. She stepped inside. The floor beneath her feet felt solid. The room opened in front of her. Simple, quiet, arranged with purpose. Light filtered through the windows, casting long lines across the floor. She stood just inside the doorway. Didn't move further. Didn't speak. Her eyes adjusted slowly, taking in each detail, the walls, the shelves, the small table near the window. Everything placed, everything intentional. Her fingers tightened slightly around the handle of her suitcase. Behind her, the ocean moved steadily against the shore. In front of her, something else waited. Not hidden anymore. Not out of reach. She stepped forward and closed the door behind her. The sound of the latch settling into place echoed softly through the room. For a moment, Marjorie didn't move. She stood just inside the doorway, her hand still resting on the handle, her suitcase beside her. The light coming through the windows shifted as clouds passed overhead, and the room seemed to breathe with it. It didn't feel abandoned. That was the first thing she noticed. It wasn't untouched either. It felt paused, as if someone had stepped out and expected to return. Her eyes adjusted slowly. The space was simple. A single main room stretched in front of her. To the left, a small kitchen area, countertop worn but clean, cabinets fitted carefully, no gaps where wood should meet wood. To the right, a sitting area with 2 chairs placed near the window, angled toward the ocean. Her breath slowed. 2 chairs. She walked toward them. Her steps were careful, her weight shifting slowly across the floor, as if she didn't want to disturb anything. The wood beneath her feet felt firm, solid, not new, but well kept. The kind of floor that had been cared for over time. She reached the chairs, ran her hand along the back of one. The surface was smooth, not factory-made, worked by hand. She knew that feeling. Leonard had built things like this. Not often. But when he did, he took his time. She sat down. The chair held her weight easily. From here, the view through the window opened wide, the ocean stretching out in front of her, gray-blue under the afternoon sky. She stayed there for a long moment, not thinking, just looking. Then she stood again. There was more to see. She turned toward the kitchen, opened one of the cabinet doors. Inside, everything was arranged neatly. A few dishes, a kettle, utensils placed carefully in a drawer. Not new, but not worn out either. Used, maintained. She closed the cabinet, moved to the counter. Her fingers brushed lightly across the surface. No dust, no neglect. Someone had been here, not long ago, or often enough to keep it this way. Her chest tightened slightly. Leonard. She turned slowly, letting her eyes move across the rest of the room. There were no photographs, no decorations, nothing that announced itself as personal. And yet, everything felt personal. The way the shelves were set at a certain height, the way the table stood near the window, positioned to catch the light. She walked toward it, ran her hand along the edge. Then she noticed something. A drawer, small, set into the side. She pulled it open. Inside, a notebook. Plain, dark cover, edges worn. Her fingers paused for a moment before touching it. Then she lifted it out. The weight of it surprised her. Not heavy, but full. She set it on the table, opened it. The first pages were filled with neat handwriting. Leonard's. She recognized it immediately. Careful, measured, each letter formed the same way, as if precision mattered even in something as simple as writing. She read the first line. Date. Then beneath it, measurements, notes, short entries. Not sentences, not stories. Records. She turned the page, more of the same. Dates, materials, repairs. Replaced hinge on north window. Reinforced step at porch. Sealed east wall before storm season. Her eyes moved quickly at first, then slower. She turned another page, and another. The entries stretched back. Years, each one small, specific, focused on the work, not the person. But then she stopped. Halfway down the page, beneath a line about sanding the table, there was something different. A sentence. Not about the work, about her. She always liked the way the light comes in from this side. Marjorie froze. Her fingers pressed lightly against the paper. She read it again. Slowly. The words didn't change. They stayed exactly as they were. Simple, direct. She turned the page. Another entry. More measurements. More notes. Then another line. Keep the chairs facing the water. She would sit there. Her throat tightened. Not sharply, just enough to notice. She kept reading. Now more carefully. Looking for those moments. They weren't frequent. Most of the notebook was still the same. Work, repairs, upkeep. But scattered through it, small lines. Observations. Not dramatic. Not emotional in the way people usually think of emotion. Just knowing. Fix the step before she sees it. Make sure the window opens easy. Not ready yet. That last one made her pause. She read it again. Not ready yet. No explanation. No date tied to anything specific. Just that. She closed the notebook halfway. Her hands rested on the cover. The room felt different now. Not just a place he had gone. Not just a place he had worked. a place he had been thinking about her all along. Her eyes moved slowly around the room again. The chairs, the table, the shelves. Everything she had touched. Everything she had noticed. He had thought about those things, planned them, adjusted them for her. Her chest tightened again, this time deeper. Confusing. Because it didn't erase anything. Didn't change what had happened with the house. Didn't change the papers. The signatures. The decision made without her. But it added something else. Something that didn't fit cleanly beside it. She opened the notebook again. Turned to the last page. The writing there was more recent. Still steady, but slightly different. Slower, maybe. The final entry read, "Door holds, lock works, key is set aside." She swallowed. Her hand moved instinctively to her coat pocket. The key. She pulled it out, set it beside the notebook, looked at both, together. Her breath came slower now, more controlled. The ocean outside moved steadily, the sound filtering through the walls. She walked to the window, stood there looking out. The horizon stretched wide, unbroken. For years he had been coming here, working, building, fixing, thinking, without telling her, without sharing it. And yet, it had been for her. In ways she was only now beginning to understand. She turned back to the room. The notebook. The key. The space he had made. Her eyes moved slowly across it all, taking it in, not rushing, not trying to solve it, just seeing it. Fully. For the first time. And somewhere in that quiet, between what she had lost and what she had just found, something inside her shifted again. Not closing this time. Opening. Marjorie stood by the window, the key still warm in her palm, the notebook open behind her. The ocean moved the same way it always had, steady, indifferent, endless. But now, it sounded different, not distant, not something outside her life, something he had been listening to all along. She thought about the kitchen table, the papers, the signatures she didn't read, the house that slipped away while she was busy holding everything else together. And then this. Years of quiet work, trips she never questioned, small repairs no one would ever notice. A place built slowly, carefully. For a moment he knew he might not be there to see. He hadn't asked her. Not then. But here, he hadn't taken the choice. He had left something unfinished, something that only meant anything if she found it herself. Marjorie turned the key once between her fingers, then set it down beside the notebook. She walked to the door and opened it. The wind came in, soft but certain. For the first time in a long while, nothing felt decided for her. Only waiting. And as she stepped out onto the porch, she realized some things aren't given to you whole. Some things are left in pieces, until you're ready to see what they were always meant to become. She looked out at the water, then back at the open door behind her. And quietly, almost to herself, she wondered, if you had been loved this carefully all along, would you have ever noticed?